Today on the agenda, I wanted to cover a topic that I've previously covered here on the channel, but I did not go into detail with the actual giving an example of how to do this. The topic is including your documentation or putting your documentation in your source code or with your source code. Now, the reason I say should be a good practice, in particular for freelancers and the open source projects that you may create or work on, is because of the fact when the documentation is in the source code, not only do you update the source code and then commit it, but then it also gives you the opportunity, because the documentation is with the source code, to update the documentation as you add new features and fix bugs. My name is Kenny. This is Tech Talk with RHT Services, where I talk about software development, web development, and all kinds of things related to tech. Now, as you see, I have this project here, the Falcon PyPlayer Weather Monitor plugin, and this is how I did it. So the documentation for this particular project will reside on GitHub. I'm not creating a separate site for the documentation. Now, if you are creating a separate site for your documentation, you can put it in a different folder like I have, and then have a CI/CD process that will then deploy it to a documentation website. Therefore, the documentation still would reside with the source code, but it would have a different set of workflows for updating that documentation on the production environment. Now, with this particular documentation, what I did was create a readme.md file. Now, when you create a repository on GitHub, it will say, hey, it will ask you if you want to create a README file, and it will also mention the fact that if you have a README file, that you're likely to get more visibility on that particular project because of the fact the README file will explain what that project is about, and more people may become interested based upon what they read in the README file. Now, with this README file, you can put in here whatever you want to. This is what I put in the README file in the root directory of the project, because when you come to the project page, so if I come back up here and hit code, this is the root directory of this particular project. And then only once I start clicking into stuff will I then go deeper into the folder structure. The way GitHub works is that it will automatically display the contents of the README, and if it is written in a markdown file, then it will automatically format that markdown file and convert it over to HTML. Now, as you see in the root README file, what I have here is the title of the project, the purpose of the project, the user guide, and how to get to the user guide, and then asking for donations for this particular project. Now, with this particular point I want to highlight here is the user guide. Obviously, as it says here, project documentation and user guide can be viewed in the user guide folder. Now, I wrote this in this manner saying, hey, go check this particular folder, because of the fact the user guide folder is here, and if you are looking at the contents of this README file, then the link will not be visible. So when you look at the contents of a README file, and I'm actually go back here and change this over to the code view, this is what you will see if you're looking at this after you check out the repository. So this link here doesn't actually go anywhere. Now, your IDE may be intelligent enough to figure out, hey, this is a link, and then allow you to control click on it to take you to the file that actually has the contents in here. Otherwise, it won't. Thus, you have to write your documentation in a way, if you are going to do it in Markdown, so that it is able to be flexible for those who are actually on GitHub, but then also still have enough information for those that are not on GitHub reading your documentation. Now, I want to point this out here that this documentation link actually has a period, which means start from the current folder or where we're currently at, and then the user_guide folder is where it should go next. This doesn't work in this particular thing, but when I come back to this link here and click it, it will then take me into the user guide folder that you saw in the previous view. Now that we're in the user guide folder, I want to elaborate on a few things. So one, you don't necessarily have to name it user guide. Some people name their documentation docs. Some people say documentation. Some people say user guide. Some people say user manual. Whatever you name it, just be consistent, how you link it and so forth. Now, in the case of a software project, it is possible that you may have a user guide, more so for the people that are not technical. And then you have a developer guide, which are for the people that are technical and may want to interact with the API or something else of that nature. If that is the case, I would suggest that you create 2 separate folders, one for developers, one for non-developers or just standard users. That way the information is separated and is very clear on how it is separated. Now, with this particular folder, because it is everything in documentation related in this particular project is in the user guide folder. I have a README, credits, FAQ, installation, report issue, and settings files. What I did is, so normally when you have a web development project or a website, you have an index file, whether it be index.html, index.md, or index.php, whatever the language, there's typically an index file. And web servers are configured so that when you go to something without that specifying the exact file, that it provides a index or it knows, hey, look for the index and send it. Now, the way GitHub works, it doesn't work in the same manner. What it does do is it looks for a README. If it sees a README, whether it's readme.txt, readme.md, or just README without an extension, it will then try to display the contents of that README as you see here. In my README file, what I've done is I've created a table of contents that link to each of these child pages or related pages so that people know what they're going to. Also, I would suggest that you name the markdown files that you're creating the same name as what they would be as far as like chapters go. And then, of course, the donations here, I really do want donations for this particular project, so I put another donation link here in this particular README file. Now, the way I've set this up is similar to how I set up the previous file. So if I click the readme.md in this particular folder and then do the source or the raw code of it, you'll see here I have the links starting from the current folder and then the file name specified accordingly. Now, I can also do a backlink or a parent link in a similar nature, but it would be double dot instead of single dot because single dot references the current folder. So I'm going to go back in my browser. Now, if I click, let's say installation. All right, and so then it takes me to the installation.md file as noted by this up here at the top. And then the contents of the installation file, because it is in Markdown, is automatically formatted by GitHub so that it is presentable to the user. Now, if you have some custom HTML or something like that that you want to drop in your Markdown file to make some necessary changes to get it to look exactly how you want, then you can do that with some restrictions. GitHub is not going to let you just freely throw any and everything in there, like changing the background and stuff like that nature. But it will allow you to format this in such a manner that is actually readable and so forth. That being said, the other parts of this are set up in a similar manner. In addition to, there are links. So this file actually just covers only the settings for this particular plugin. So it is named appropriately settings.md with the h1 tag of plugin settings and everything else related to Markdown. Now, if we come over to the report issue, what I have here is I have this particular page. And so anywhere else in the documentation, let's say, let me go back to the FAQs as an example. That I have a link that of referencing, so for instance, create an issue on the project repository. So this is set up here so that if I click this, it actually goes to the project repository page. But then I also have, hey, you have another feature you want to add, see the report issue page of this guide. So then if I click report issue, it then takes me over to this particular page, to which then I have this link here, to which then that would take me over to the issues queue on this particular project. Likewise, you can have links to other stuff in here, but just note that it's designed so that the document can be formatted without you actually having to do custom HTML or anything else of that nature because of the fact you're writing it in Markdown. That being said, hopefully this gives you a decent enough example on how to write your documentation and keep your documentation within your source code. I am for creating the documentation and then having the documentation on GitHub. But like I mentioned before, if you want to have your documentation on a separate site, you can do that through a CI/CD process and not have to worry about GitHub formatting your documentation with the Markdown that you provide. Any comments or questions, please feel free to drop those down below. Thank you for checking out this video. As always, thank you for watching. See you in the next one.